Hello, everybody, and welcome in. My name is Mike Tuck. I am joined here by Eric Lopez. This is our NBA Finals preview. One matchup that we probably wish we would have had when we were coworkers, Elo, years ago. The Miami Heat, your favorite team, against the Los Angeles Lakers, my favorite team. A finals matchup that nearly materialized in 2011. Sorry, my Lakers couldn't make it for a third straight finals as your Heat and LeBron James advanced to one. And almost again in 2009, we almost had LeBron versus Kobe, but the Magic got in the way, as we remember that when we worked together. And
we're both there for that one.
Yes, absolutely. So this has been a long time coming, really, for both franchises that have been wildly successful. But I think it's interesting. I want to start looking back at last year first for both of the Lakers and the Miami Heat. The Miami Heat last year, a non-playoff team, 10th in the Eastern Conference. They made wholesale changes in the offseason. How do you think Miami got from where they were a year ago to where they're at right now?
Well, if you remember last year when they missed the playoffs, that was Dwayne Wade's, finale, his swan song. So it was really more about the Dwayne Wade tour, and they just had a chance to make the 8th seed, didn't make it. Dwayne retires. So now, it's kind of everybody's thinking, well, it's really you're building for the 2021 offseason for the free agent market, right? They're clearing cap space and all that. And then the Heat, the big free agency, they get Jimmy Butler, which I think is the turning point here. They get Jimmy Butler, which surprised a lot of people because people thought he would stay at Philadelphia. Depending on what you read, Philadelphia didn't offer a 5th year, or maybe Jimmy wanted a 5th year. There's been talk that, reports that Dwayne Wade actually recruited Jimmy Butler to come to Miami. Pat Riley has wanted Jimmy Butler since he was in Minnesota. And they kind of make that sign and trade where they give up Josh Richardson. But even then, when that move was happening, this, people were questioning, like, wow, Jimmy Butler in Miami, what does that mean? Like, you're a 4 seed and everything. Well, later on, even before that signing, they drafted a kid by the name of Tyler Hero with the 14th pick, and it was a mixed reaction. There were some Heat fans didn't want that pick. They didn't think he could play. He was just a shooter at Kentucky, And so they took him, and he turned out to be really good. And then they had this other rookie by the name of Kendrick Nunn they signed in free agency. So all of a sudden, they're adding these guys. Duncan Robinson, who was in the G League, and they're playing well. But you're not thinking of them as a serious title contender until Pat Riley, during the trade deadline, decided to trade Justice Winslow, who you and I thought, hey, this is a guy that was going to be one of the faces of the Heat. Although to your credit, you had questions of Justice coming out of Duke. You were always saying, I would kind of calm down on the expectations with it, right?
Yeah, no, I thought he had limitations. I think he's going to play in the NBA for 10 to 12 years and be a solid contributor, but never going to be the star that a lot of people envisioned him as being, more of a role player. And really a lot of credit to Riley. I mean, you make a 4-way trade, and it's not like you gave up nothing. You turned over the roster. Josh Richardson's a nice player, a great complimentary piece. Hassan Whiteside, pluses and minuses, but he can still be a force in this league. And then, again, with Justice Winslow, one of the young guns on the Heat team, Riley really turned over your roster from last summer into this summer.
And I'm glad you brought the Whiteside. They dumped him to Portland, so they dumped that big contract, and that cleared up space to play Bam Adebayo, which was huge. Because, I mean, there's no secret, Hassan Whiteside was not the hardest working player, and I think that frustrated the Heat organization. Bam is obviously the opposite. So that cleared space for Bam, and you mentioned the Winslow trade. They get Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder as part of that trade, as well as Solomon Hill, who actually got to play in the conference final. And that was a moment where people realized, whoa, they think they can make a run, and it was clear what their plan was. They made that move to bring guys, veterans for the playoffs, and guys that can guard Giannis. It was no secret. And they felt they could match up with Milwaukee early on, and as we would find out in the bubble later on, they were proven correct. So you're right. The way they drastically changed this roster is remarkable job by this organization to dump Hassan Whiteside, to get rid of – ironically, though, one of the smartest things they did was they didn't get rid of Goran Dragic, who they were trying to get rid of to clear space for Butler. They actually offered him to Dallas, and Mark Cuban said no, which you kind of think back to that. Why didn't Dallas want him, number one? And number two, how big has that turned out to be for the Heat? Because Goran Dragic's been tremendous in this run.
No question. Goran Dragic has been a lightning rod for everything Miami's been able to do. Sometimes the best trades you make are the ones that you don't make, and that really helped to be a plus for Miami this past season and in the bubble so far, incredibly so. The Lakers story very similar, right? You know, from last year, you basically have LeBron, KCP, Caruso, Kuzma, Rondo, and JaVale McGee. So like half the roster comes back, but you're not entirely sure they're all going to come back until you have a decision by Kawhi Leonard to go to the Clippers. And once that happens, the Lakers obviously had made the trade for Anthony Davis. A lot of people I thought were overly critical of a deal. Suddenly, a year, half a year previous when the Lakers tried to get him, they weren't giving up enough. Then they actually make the move and they gave up too much, which blew me away because as good as Brandon Ingram is, and maybe Lonzo Ball can become a very valuable piece on a great team someday, you have to give up something to get an Anthony Davis. And the Lakers clearly recognize that. And then the chips immediately, I'll give credit to the front office for this. They knew what they wanted to do when they didn't get Kawhi Leonard. They didn't panic. They went out, they got Danny Green. They went out and they got Dwight Howard. They went out and they got Avery Bradley. They make the move in season to bring in Markieff Morris was really an integral move, and it allows them to play a little bit bigger while playing small ball because Morris's ability to slide between 3 and 4 and even 5 at sometimes with LeBron James obviously being able to play bigger than his size on the floor, it helps out a lot for the Lakers. But they turned over their roster the same way the Heat turned over their roster from last year to this year, and they've really been as you saw, the number 1 seed in the Western Conference all year long. It wasn't a fluke, and they've proven to be the best team in the West this season. For Miami, the expectations, like you said, weren't the same. The expectations weren't that they were going to win the East, but they made those moves. And I would add, not just for Giannis, but Pascal Siakam and Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown. They were thinking big picture about how we're going to match up with all the best teams in the Eastern Conference, and it came to fruition, but not without maybe a seed of doubt, because they were a 5 seed, Elo. They were a team that wasn't a playoff team last year. They don't have a ton of playoff veteran experience, minus, some of those role players like obviously Andre Iguodala, who's back in the finals again. So what did you see in the first 8 games in the bubble that made you think, wow, this is a team that can go on a run?
Well, it was hard to see much, to be honest, because they were kind of experimenting with different things. I mean, Kendrick Nunn was in the rotation, had COVID, which is why that's kind of really derailed him from this bubble situation. But, Miles Leonard was the starting, he was the starter. And he went from being a starter to not being in the rotation. And he was experimenting with different things. You noticed Andre Iguodala and Jay Crowder were playing more together. They were trying different lineups and things like that. So you really, it wasn't until the Milwaukee game in the bubble where they had a big lead at the half. You could tell that they were like experimenting with some things that might, because we might get Milwaukee in the second round. Because the way that was looking, right, they knew they weren't going to catch Boston or Toronto for the 2 and the 3. And they were probably going to play Indiana. That's the way it played out. Philly didn't move up. So I think they were like, let's not show everything against Milwaukee here. And there was quiet confidence that they could feel they could play against Milwaukee. Meanwhile, Milwaukee was struggling in the bubble. They weren't the same team that they were prior to the stoppage. And remember, there's no home court. So it's not like, you got to go to Milwaukee and Miami. And I think the biggest thing, because I covered a lot of the media availabilities in the bubble, the Heat were one of the teams in the bubble that embraced being there. Milwaukee was apprehensive. I don't know. This is tough. A lot of teams are like, this is rough. And as the bubble developed, there was you heard it. There were some mental issues with some players mentally had a hard time dealing with being in a bubble and isolated. Some black guys had a hard time adjusting to playing in the bubble. Lonzo Ball, for example, was terrible for the Pelicans. And a lot of people think he just didn't adapt to the bubble because it is a different circumstance. The Heat embraced it. In fact, I think people that cover the Heat said this is like a Pat Riley dream come true. Like if they said that the Heat would have to play in the bubble for 3 months, he said, great, where do we sign up? Because that's how they are in the Heat culture, if you will. It's you got to practice hard. It's like a boot camp. And I think the Heat, their motto has been from day one, let's beat the bubble. They want to be the team that beats the bubble. And I think that's when I thought, like, wow, this is a team that's going to be tough to get out because they don't care how long they're there. And I think that has shown in how they've played. in this playoffs. And then the interesting tweak, Goran Dragic was coming off the bench. And then he had a couple of big games at the end of the reseeding games, especially one of the games I think was against Boston. He had a big game, and that allowed Eric Spoelstra to change his mind and start Dragic and put him in the lineup. And that's when they would take off in the postseason, because Goran Dragic, obviously Jimmy Butler gets a lot of the attention. And there was the questions, can you win with Jimmy Butler as your best player? Well, the answer is, yeah, you can when Jimmy Butler may not be your best player on a given night. It could be Goran Dragic, which has been most of the nights, or a Bam Adebayo, et cetera.
Yeah, and even Tyler Hero, you're right. Miami's really alternated that role of lead dog by quarter. I mean, forget a game, by quarter sometimes. Yeah. And that's really a benefit when you can't narrow your focus on defending one of them. Like the Lakers, the Heat went 3-5 in those first 8 games. A lot of people obviously spent time talking about the Lakers because of LeBron James, because they're the Lakers and people like talking about them, and really thought those struggles were going to carry over. But like the Heat, the Lakers did a lot of experimenting. Frank Vogel and his staff really decided, we're going to play everybody. We're going to play a variety of lineups. We're going to see what works, what doesn't work as well. We'll play big, we'll play small. And they did a lot of different things. And as it turned out, I think they figured out who they were going to play. Now, some of that was immediately brought into question in their very first playoff game when they took on the red-hot Portland Trailblazers and lost that game. The Lakers shot they shoot 11% or something from three in that game. It was a really awful offensive performance, but I honestly never wavered. I said, as good as Portland's been, the Lakers held their offense in check. It was just an awful shooting night for Los Angeles, and they pretty much held course. They didn't do anything demonstrative to change. J.R. Smith played a little bit in game 2 of that series, but other than that, they just kind of said, we're going to stay the course. We're going to make adjustments. You saw it again in the second round with Los Angeles after the lost game 1. They made the proper adjustments and responded in both teams. I mean, they're both 12-3 in the playoffs. They've both been dominant forces. I do have to ask, because as much as it could have been an advantage for the Lakers to play these games in Staples, the Heat are just one of 3 teams that weren't seated on the top half of the bracket, a 5 seed, joining the Rockets, which went back-to-back and beat Orlando in the finals, in the New York Knicks in what was the strike-shortened season, which almost deserves an asterisk in itself because there was very little difference between the 8 seed and the 1 seed that year. You guys didn't have to go on the road at all. How do you think that factored in to your chances to not have to play games 1 and games 2 or games later in the series in Indiana or Milwaukee or Boston?
I think it helped, obviously, from a travel standpoint and not having to go on the road. But I don't think it changes the results necessarily. Like the Indiana series, they swept Indiana. They were clearly the better team. Maybe if there was a home court at Indiana, that series goes 5-6 games. I think they were the better team against Milwaukee. Maybe that goes to 6 game, or maybe, if it's a home-and-home series. Miami had all the answers. They built the wall for Giannis, which was a problem for him. And it was the same problem Milwaukee had a year ago when they had home court. So they knew what the issues were there, and they just overmatched Indiana. And again, the pickups of Crowder and Iguodala have been huge. Crowder has been a nice defensive player. He, as we'll get into, he's going to probably have a big assignment coming up in the finals, but he's been getting Jason Tatum, for example, a lot of the Boston series. It gives them defensively that identity. And with, that spreads the court. They've been able to go small. They've been able to go big. I mentioned Kelly Olynyk. Got a lot of minutes in the Indiana series, didn't play much in the Boston series. So both teams kind of have flexibility. Let's bring up a guy that you didn't bring up, who I think has been a huge factor for the Lakers, because the biggest question I had was who was going to be the third guy on the Lakers. You knew what you were getting from LeBron and Anthony Davis, but I think a lot of people were skeptical, myself included, I'll admit it, on the Lakers run, which is who was going to be that third guy that you could depend on. Not necessarily to be the scorer, but just be their third best player. Because you would admit a lot that roster is up and down. Like Kyle Kuzma, everybody kind of media thought it would be him, but he's been up and down, and I would argue maybe he regressed a little bit. To me, the guy who's been the unsung hero has been Rajon Rondo, who missed that Portland series in the seeding games because he got hurt, right? One of the first practices in the bubble. Mm-hmm. And if I remember, he injured his back he was supposed to play in the Portland series, but he injured his back. I think he's been a difference maker. I don't think they make the finals without him, because what he has brought to the table is an extra playmaker. So instead of LeBron having to make every single decision on every single possession, by having Rajon out there allows LeBron to just say, you know what, I can be off the ball and be a scorer if I have to be, or take possessions off. And Rajon has run the offense well, and he's shot the ball very well. I think he's been the third best player for the Lakers. And to me, he is a big factor in this finals coming up, because I thought he was the difference in the Denver series. I thought he's been the difference in the Houston series as well, with Frank Vogel's adjustments, because Rajon is a great on-ball defender. And I think that also gave some problems to Denver and bringing the ball up as well. Defensively, has made the Lakers, I think, a better defensive team. So I think Rajon, who did not have a great regular season, has really been that playoff Rondo they've talked about. He's been huge for you.
I'll divide this into two parts. One, I think that Rondo has been their third best player for evaluating individuals, but I'll also say it's been a misnomer. I've told this to people all along. To me, the keys for the Lakers, your ability to rebound, your ability to get out in transition, and obviously defend, which they do very well. And they've been able to check those boxes for most every playoff game and pretty consistently throughout every playoff game. The idea that they needed a third guy, and most people point to scoring. Let's not kid ourselves, Elo. That's why Kyle Kuzma's name gets volunteered there. He's young. He's a guy that can score 17, 18 points a game. He's shown that in the past on lesser Lakers squads. I said, it doesn't matter. And you know why it doesn't matter? You're a Heat fan. The Miami Heat can relate to this better than anyone. They have multiple guys any given night that can step up and fill that third scoring role. They don't even need a third scorer. It might be a fourth and a fifth and a sixth scorer that all contribute double digits. Danny Green can do it. KCP has played pretty well in these playoffs, pretty consistently well too. He can do that. Rondo can do that. Caruso can do that. Kuzma can do that. Morris can do that. All these guys, what the Lakers have, much like the Heat have in some cases, the Heat have some younger players, but they do have some veterans as well. We saw Andre Iguodala show up big in the last closeout game against Boston, is they have multiple guys that are comfortable as guys that can score 15, 16 in any given night. So if they get it going, they can fill it up and they can complement LeBron James. And
LeBron is the type that can get guys open and give them some easy baskets. So that's why when I say with Rondo, I said it was not necessarily the scoring, although he shot the ball very well, which has helped them spread the court, but just the way he's run the offense and give LeBron a breather. Because that was one of the things that Frank was looking for, right? Like, who would be a playmaker when LeBron was not on the court and would take a break? I thought that was one of the questions they were trying to figure out, what would work from a ball handling standpoint, and Rondo's been the answer to that.
Yeah, and an interesting twist, I do think Avery Bradley is a very good player. He was all year long. He's not part of this Lakers bubble squad because of family reasons. He elected not to join the team. They brought in Dion Waiters. They brought in J.R. Smith. Those guys really have been non-contributors throughout the playoffs. They haven't been needed for the Lakers to this point. But one of the side effects of that is what we've seen as I told our buddy Fritzy, who's obviously a huge Lakers fan as well, I said, I did not see Caruso and Rondo as being the closeout backcourt for this team. And that's what it's become. You brought up playmakers. Caruso, not to the level of Rondo or LeBron, but also a guy that can make plays and makes the right play at the right times. I think at times they will struggle with those guys on the floor if they're forced to shoot from distance, because neither one excel in that area. We've seen Rondo probably play a little bit better, maybe even above water on his shooting ability so far in the playoffs. But there's no question. I think the strength in numbers, which was the Warriors' motto in their run to all those championships, has been a key factor for both the Heat and the Lakers in their run to the NBA Finals. I'm Mike Tuck. He's Eric Lopez, former co-workers, and now we're going to be on opposing sidelines, if you will, as Elo, a big Miami Heat fan, and of course, I'm a lifelong Lakers fan as well. Two teams, first time ever. You have two teams that didn't make the playoffs the year previous that are meeting in these NBA Finals. We've run down many of the reasons why that's the case. We're looking at all new teams. They did play twice this season. It almost feels like it was a full year ago, right? December and November, the Lakers and Heat actually got 2 games in before the season got postponed. The Lakers did win both of those matchups. But when we look at this matchup, Elo, if you're going to underline a player or two for the Miami Heat that you think can excel in this series, who are those guys?
Well, as far as excelling, I think it's going to be I think Goran Dragic is a guy that, to me, has been a factor. I thought he outplayed Kimball Walker in the Eastern Conference Final in the point guard matchup, and he's a guy that's got to win this point guard matchup against the Lakers. And I'm curious how the Lakers will guard him in that regard, because he's going to, and I think when Gordon is at his best is when he's attacking the basket and not just settling for the 3-point shot. But he's been a guy that's been scoring you can count on for 20 points plus in the playoffs. And I think he's somebody that could excel here and really force the Lakers' hand defensively on making some moves here and what they got to do. Because, I think Bam, to me, the Heat best player is Bam Adebayo. And I think you've seen what he did in Game 6 taking over, and I think his stock is going up. But he brings the table defensively. Well, he's going to have his hands full, and I'm very curious to see how Spoelstra handles this. Does he have Bam assigned to Anthony Davis? Probably some, but I don't think all game long. Do the Heat play some zone against the Lakers? I think those are some questions, but I think he's a factor. I think Tyler Hero, you've seen the breakout party for Tyler Hero, bringing off the bench, scoring, shooting the ball. That's, I think, a guy who can flourish because, Jimmy Butler is not a scorer. And I don't think Jimmy Butler's offense, while it's going to be important, he's going to be busy on the defensive side of the ball, I have a feeling. He's going to have a lot of defensive assignments. So I think Hero, Dragic, those guys off the, scoring are key guys that have to excel here and create problems, because Hero's a tough cover. And I don't know if the Lakers have seen, that's going to be something they'll have to adjust to, seeing Tyler, who can drive to the basket with either hand. He's got tremendous skills. And the Heat's three-point shooting, which wasn't great against Boston, but normally was tremendous against Milwaukee. How do the Lakers guard the perimeter will be fascinating. I think, to me, Dragic and Hero are key factors. They both have to provide scoring, because I think Butler, while he'll get his, you can't depend on him to score 30, 40. Not in this series, because I think he's going to have very, very big defensive assignments.
Yeah, it will be interesting, I think, from a couple of things you said there. One, with the three-point shooting, the Lakers have been tested, having to cover Dame and CJ in the first round. Certainly the Houston Rockets, who shoot more threes than anybody in the second round of the playoffs, and even the Denver Nuggets, who can pull you out with both Jamal Murray and Jokic. One difference will be they don't have to focus, I don't think, on any individual in particular for the Heat. It may change through minutes in the quarter. We saw LeBron get assigned Jamal Murray in the back end of the last two games of the series against the Nuggets. I'm sure he'll probably pick up Jimmy Butler in moments. He might even go on Hero in moments, but there isn't a one or two guys for the Miami Heat you have to focus on if you're the Lakers. So I think how they match up against Miami will be very revealing. One interesting stat that I pulled, in Milwaukee probably boosts it a little bit, and Boston Celtics take it down a little bit, but some credit to Boston, who defensively is one of the best teams in the league as well, is the Heat through these bubble playoff games where they're 12-3 are shooting 35.7% from three. The Lakers are shooting 35.5% from three.
Right.
The Heat shoot a few more, but they're shooting virtually the same percentage. Everyone will talk about the Heat's shooting and how that can be a difference maker. Look, I think the one thing for Lakers fans all year long and watching the team, if they shoot the three well, no one can beat them, because they're so good in so many other areas individually and collectively. If they have a game where they're shooting above 40% from three, forget about it. When you have a chance to beat them is when they have one of their off nights, which they're capable of doing. And I think that's where Miami's going to try to force LA into probably shooting more threes, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to ask you, because you saw Spoelstra use the zone against Boston, and it's a unique zone because what he does is he'll play his front court guys at the top. It's different than a normal zone you might see where the guards are at the top and the inside guys are perimeter. You're going to see Jimmy Butler, Andre Iguodala, Jay Crowder at the top of the zone because it creates length issues. They can get to balls, knock balls away, create turnovers. My question to you is, from the Lakers standpoint, if they see the zone, and obviously LeBron knows, I don't know if Spoelstra will use the zone as much in this series as he did against Boston, because Boston couldn't figure it out for multiple games. Now the Lakers' advantage is they've seen them play the zone, so they should be more prepared.
Right.
But who are the shooters you got to depend on? Because I think you're right. The Heat are going to bet. They're going to gamble and say, I dare you to beat us from the perimeter game. I think Miami wants this to turn into a three-point shootout series, because I think they'll take their shooters over the Lakers shooters, and they'll feel like if we play our game, we will win. And my question to you is, who do the Lakers have to depend on here to be solid from the three-point line in this series?
Everyone. There's not one person you underline. They're all going to have opportunities. When Danny Green is on the floor, the ball is going to find him, particularly.
What's happened to him? Why? What's happened to? Because a lot of people think he's not been playing as well. I'm terrified as a Heat fan. I'm terrified because he's a Heat killer. He's a Heat killer.
Yeah,
from past
you remember
years.
the Spurs, for sure. Look, he wasn't good in last year's finals for Toronto. Fred VanVleet, coming off the bench, clearly outplayed Danny Green and made him less of a factor in that finals against the Warriors. Danny Green's kind of hit or miss. He's been that way all season. I thought he had a pretty good regular season. He's had moments in this postseason. But look, he's going to be a guy that's going to defend. He's going to be a guy that's going to shoot that corner three. That's really what they count on him for. Markieff Morris, the same thing. Defend, shoot the corner three. Kuzma and Caruso are the two best cutters. And the key to the zone for the Lakers will be finding a way to get Anthony Davis and LeBron James in particular into that top of the key, free throw line extended area on cuts. And when they get the ball there, they're triple threats. And what will make the Lakers effective against the zone is when they're moving. In half-court offense in particular, when they're moving, they become stagnant when LeBron or Anthony Davis ISO from the top or from the wings because all eyes get to be on them. And with the Heat, the way they play that zone, that's going to be particularly frustrating and in Miami's favor if the Lakers try to play that way. When they're effective was when Caruso and Kuzma are cutting, even KCP to some extent has been shown, that he can be a cutter and valuable for the Miami Heat. So those are some things that I look at if I'm the Lakers as far as going up against the zone. You don't want to get into a three-point contest with the Heat. The Lakers should top out at about 33s on any given night attempted. It's going to be all of them individually, though, Elo. Whoever's on the floor, they're going to find themselves with open looks because Anthony Davis and LeBron James will demand double teams.
You just stole my thunder. I think they're going to, especially Davis, I think they're going to double Davis a lot. And here's the other thing. I think you would agree with this. Davis can't just settle because I think the Heat are going to give Anthony Davis open shots from the perimeter as well and say, go ahead. Beat us from the perimeter. And if you make them, well, congratulations. Make another one. I really do. I think they're going to – if they do play a lot of zone, it's to protect Bam and some other – from foul trouble, for example. Yeah. Because they need Bam on the court.
I think that's an interesting angle, too. I wanted to ask you about it. Bam's as the starting center. The Lakers, I don't know if they're going to go back to McGee as the starter. To me, they should stick with Dwight. He's just clearly outplayed McGee.
He's been fantastic.
And McGee probably shouldn't even see the floor in these NBA finals. I think it's going to be more of Dwight Howard. But that means someone has to guard Anthony Davis. That isn't Bam Adebayo in that case. The Lakers rebounding has been a real key for them all year long. They're one of the best rebounding teams in the NBA. How do the Heat match up with the Lakers' bigger lineup?
I think that's a great question. I could see them playing Jay Crowder, believe it or not, just because he's been playing the small center. And that's the thing, does Spoelstra decide to go small? There's two ways he could attack this. Does he go small and play Crowder at center and try to spread Anthony Davis out to the court and get him away from the rim, which creates space for Dragic and Butler to drive, which they like to do? That's one way to do it. The other avenue is you might see more of Kelly Olynyk to play inside to cover Davis and spread him out with his shooting. So I got to think that Olynyk will play some here, but I'm curious how both coaches will react to that because, as you mentioned, if you're Frank Vogel, do you go small and respond and try to guard the Heat in the perimeter like you did the Rockets? This is almost like a mini Rockets series. The big difference, though, is Frank did a great thing in the Houston series, which was he double-teamed James Harden to get the ball away from him quickly and force those spot-up shooters to make a play. They couldn't do it. You can't do that against the Heat. You can't double anybody because everybody can make a play. Like, they use Bam Adebayo as a point center offensively at times. So, to me, I'm fascinated. What do you think? Do you think we see more size for the Lakers trying to dominate the boards against the Heat, which I do think is a weak spot? Or do you think Frank will go back to going small like he did in the Rocket series?
I think you'll see both. I think the Lakers will start big. I think they'll start big at the beginning of each half. And I think that you'll see them gradually go to their smaller lineup because obviously Anthony Davis can play the five. And you have a couple of guys, whether it's Morris, Kuzma, or even LeBron. I mean, potentially they can all stack up as threes and fours, and they can still play bigger than their actual size. For Miami, the key would be to probably keep all shooters on the floor as best you can, because what the Lakers did successfully against Houston is they said, all right, we'll plop Anthony Davis on Russell Westbrook. That way he can still have 1 foot near the paint, knowing that Russell wants to drive. They're not necessarily, I don't see a matchup where they're going to be able to do that against the Heat. Maybe Iguodala some, and they could place, Markieff Morris on Bam Adebayo. But keeping Bam out of foul trouble seems like it will be one of the most important things for Miami, because when he leaves the floor, I don't see how they're going to match up with the Lakers. So let me go to this now, Elo. Keys for the Miami Heat, if they're able to win the NBA Finals, what are some keys?
I think they got to shoot close to, I would say 39% from the three-point line. If they shoot 35, if they shoot like they did against Boston, they will get blown off the court in 5 games. They have to shoot from the 3, because you're going to lose the free throw battle more than likely to the Lakers. You just are. So you got to make up for that by winning the 3-point battle.
For what it's worth, the Heat have gotten to the foul line more than the Lakers have in this postseason.
Yeah,
the Lakers getting calls. The Lakers actually one of the lowest in terms of getting to the foul line this postseason. And part of it, I'll jump in and just say it's because at times Anthony Davis and LeBron float out to the perimeter. When they're attacking, forget about it, because you're either fouling them or they're
correct.
Inside.
And I got to believe LeBron will attack in this series. And I think it's going to be interesting to see, especially if they're playing the zone, offensive rebounding is a fact. The Heat tend to give up offensive rebounding. That's right at the Lakers' strength. That's a huge concern, is the rebounding. And that's where, to me, Anthony Davis, we're going to talk about his scoring. He needs to go in that 12 to 15 rebounds a game. If he could dominate there, him and Bam, who gets more rebounds, I'm fascinated to see there. But they got to dominate the board. So I'm worried from the Heat, they got to be very good defensively on the rebounding. I think they could make this, if they can keep the Lakers at half-court offense, I think they'll do well. Where they run into problems is second and third opportunities. That gets you in foul trouble. That's why I mean foul trouble. That's why I'm concerned, because I think the Lakers are going to win the rebounding battle and get some free throws out of it. You saw that with Jason Tatum in Boston in the last series. So I think that's 2 factors. I think Jimmy Butler obviously has to play at an all-star level. He has played LeBron James for many years and is one of the few guys that have had minimal success. Like, he stands up to him. He can't be in foul trouble either. If he gets owned in that matchup, if LeBron has just got him in the foul trouble, the Heat also have no chance. Bam and Butler have to be in the series, because I think those two have huge responsibilities on the defensive side of the ball. So I think that the 3-point shooting, defensive rebounding, protect the basketball. Don't turn it over. Miami did a good job against Boston in that. That way you keep the Lakers away from transition. I think those are the 3 factors.
What scares you the most?
Anthony Davis. I mean, I don't know there's an answer for him. Nobody has an answer for him, right? Like, Jokic had no answer for him. And that's the scary thing, is I don't know how Spoelstra is going to figure that out, because, could Bam guard him? Sure, but there's risk if you guard him early. Now, could I see Bam guarding him in the 4th quarter? Yeah, I could see that. But you got to get him to the 4th quarter. I don't know how they slow him down. I personally think if the Lakers win the title, and LeBron may not like this, but I think Anthony Davis is the NBA Finals MVP. That's how I think the Lakers win this series, because I don't see the Heat have an answer for him. I actually feel optimistic the Heat have guys they could put on LeBron. Jimmy Butler can be on him. Jay Crowder will probably be on him. Andre Iguodala, they have a history. He'll be on him. Bam could even guard him. I don't know what they're going to do with Anthony Davis. That's the number one scary thing. And I mentioned it earlier. Rajon Rondo and Danny Green are both been historically Heat killers in the playoffs and in the finals. And I worry, especially with Danny Green, that he has a big finals, because he just sees the Heat jerseys and he's like, all right, I feel good. I'll hit 6-7 threes like I always do. That worries me.
I think for the Lakers, to me, the keys to success, you got to run as much as they can, get it in transition. Miami's very good at getting back. But if the Lakers can run, that's been such a huge advantage, because in the open court, they're nightmarish. Between Caruso, LeBron, Rondo, guys like Kuzma, they all can run, they all can finish. And when they're forcing turnovers and getting out running, they're almost impossible to stop. It also allows them to get more open shots on the perimeter as well when they get that semi-break going as well. So that's one. Rebounding. If the Lakers rebound, a couple of times they've struggled. It's where Houston had a big game rebounding and matched up with them, or Portland was able to use some of their size and rebound with them. And you're right. To me, that's the scary thing. If you're Miami, I don't know that they can zone when the Lakers are big. The Lakers, to me, would get way too many second opportunities between Dwight, Anthony Davis, LeBron James crashing the boards, or just physically being bigger and being able to attack the glass. So that's, to me, a major concern if I'm Miami and where the Lakers can succeed. And then I would say, finally, you mentioned the three-point shooting. It's the same thing with LA. If they're hitting above 37%, they don't have to go as high as 39. If they're hitting above 37, then they're just almost impossible to deal with. But if they're struggling, then that leaves the door open for Miami to play well and find a way to win games in this series and maybe even steal away an NBA championship. I have great respect for Miami, and I think that they've certainly earned their way here. It doesn't feel like a normal 5 seed. It feels like a different season in a way because they looked like the best team in the Eastern Conference on their way to the NBA Finals. I don't think, I like you, they have an answer for Anthony Davis because Bam can't do it all game long. It's usually would just get in foul trouble, I think, and it would be problems for Miami. And they don't have anyone else on the roster. Crowder can get physical with him and try to force him out a little bit. But if he gets inside, I mean, he'll shoot over the top of people. And you see when Anthony Davis puts the ball on the deck, and even if he gets to the mid-range, he can shoot those little floaters and find success.
Yeah, the only guy that stops Anthony Davis in this series is Anthony Davis.
Right.
If Anthony Davis is passive, like he has been at times. I remember that second half in the Portland game when they lost. He was not very good in that second half.
Several games like that, even in games that won, where he's reluctant to be aggressive.
There you go. You just nailed it. If he's passive, the Heat have a shot. That's the only shot they have in slowing him down. The Heat have to make this series similar to the 2011 finals, where and it's eerily similar in that the Heat had the big three, right? With LeBron, Wade in their prime, and Bosh. But the Mavericks had more depth, and they shot the ball well from the three-point line. Jason Terry, Nowitzki, and all those guys. But they also had a LeBron James that in that series that was passive, and that's what cost the Heat that series. The Heat kind of need a similar formula here. Shoot the ball well from the three-point line, play well defensively, but they need a passive Anthony Davis in this series. If we're going deep into this series and we're talking about Anthony Davis in foul trouble or the fact he's only shooting this many shots, now if you're a Laker fan, I think you got to be worried about that.
Yeah. Well, it's Riley versus the Lakers. A lot of great memories there. It's LeBron.
Riley against LeBron. I mean, I've got it on my wall here. LeBron's on the wall. I mean,
LeBron versus the Heat. Shaq's played for both teams. There's a lot of connections between these two franchises. If you look at the last 20 years, they've been two of the most successful. You throw the Spurs in the conversation as well, clearly, with what they've been able to do. Arguably the three most successful franchises in the NBA, with the Warriors certainly in the last decade as well. Ultimately, how do you see it end, Danilo?
As much as I like to see the Heat win the series, historically in the NBA, you go with the team that has the best players on the court, and the Lakers have that. LeBron's the best player in the court. Anthony Davis is the second best. The only chance the Heat have is players 3 through 9 have to be good enough to overcome that. Kind of like Dallas did in 2011, kind of like the Pistons did. You know this in the 2004 series against the Lakers. That's the only chance, but that's usually the exception. I'm not betting against LeBron. I think this year has been destined to be the Lakers. If you think about this, with Kobe passing in January, that was unfortunate. And you look at this path for the Lakers. They were the 1 seed like they were in Kobe's title year in 2009 when it was his first title without Shaq. They beat the Rockets in the second round in 2009. They beat the Rockets this year in the second round. They beat the Nuggets with Carmelo Anthony in the Western Conference Finals in 2009. They beat the Nuggets this year. They ended up winning the NBA title. You and I were there in Orlando against the Magic. Here we are 11 years later. They're playing in Orlando in Central Florida against a team from the state of Florida. I just think I think it's destined. I think the Lakers is destined to win the title, and I think they win this for Kobe.
This is
6 games.
This is as good of an opportunity for LeBron to win a championship. You can make an argument that this is his best opportunity as far as being favored in the NBA Finals. You could make cases every other finals LeBron has played in. He's only been favored in 3, and he's only won 3, obviously. But even in those cases that he won, Oklahoma City had the home court advantage in that series. against San Antonio, the Spurs had, veteran.
He wasn't favored in the Dallas series?
No, he was. They lost that one.
Okay.
I said they won 3. That was actually one they were favored in and lost. That's it. Okay. But you look at it on paper, and with all the respect you can have for Miami, everyone's still going to see the number 5 next to the Heat. And they're going to recognize the Lakers have a 1 next to them. And the expectation is the Lakers are going to win these NBA Finals.
Oh, yeah.
From the moment the Heat eliminated the Bucks, and certainly from the moment the Nuggets eliminated the Clippers, the Lakers clearly became the odds-on favorites. I would expect them to fulfill that. I would say right next to the Heat and the Lakers, one thing that they have in common, their benches, their togetherness, their chemistry, them cheering for each other, that is what each of them has had in droves throughout this entire postseason. They want to be there. They're there for the right reasons. They want to win. LeBron, I think, recognizes it. Anthony Davis is now starting to taste it. He's hungry to win that first NBA championship. Look, LeBron's got his number retired for the Heat and the Cavs. He wins this one, he's going to get it retired for the Lakers as well. It'll be interesting if Anthony Davis switches next year and how that plays into it. But he'll have his number in the Raptors at some point if he wins this for the Lakers. And I do think he will. I think the Lakers just have the better overall team. The Heat have arrived here maybe a year early.
2 years, some would argue. I mean,
yeah, maybe even 2 years earlier.
I really do, because I think a lot of people thought this was like an audition for the free agent market after 21. Right. I think they're 2 years ahead of schedule here, because think about it. If you're a marquee free agent in that class where there's Giannis, potentially Kawhi Leonard, which I think has to be brought up after the Doc Rivers news, who knows what's going to happen with the Clippers next year and beyond. A marquee free agent, you look at Miami, that's a pretty attractive place right now to go. That's a team that's ready to win. So I think the Heat are playing with house money. I don't think there's any pressure on the Heat. They've already succeeded a lot of people's expectations. Sure. To me, this is like a Cinderella story for Miami, whereas the Lakers, there's pressure to win now, right? Because it's not like this team's built for the future.
Yeah, and they really haven't been pushed. I mean, they've lost a couple of game ones, but they haven't been pushed to the point where they've felt the pressure, I don't think, at any point. And I don't think that they will either. I think LeBron's just – his championship moxie, I think, is going to help guide this team. They have guys like Danny Green that have been there and done that. But this is also perhaps his best chance, not just from a matchup standpoint, but realistically, it's an older roster. So it's only going to get tougher next year and the year after that for LeBron and for the rest of this team. And like the Heat, they'll have to change their roster over the next couple of years. But I do think that the Lakers are the favorite. They've been the favorite at the very least since the Clippers were eliminated. And I do expect them to win. I have respect for Miami. I think if Miami ends up getting like a Tyler Hero game of 37 or ends up getting a Jimmy Butler game of 37 or ends up getting one of those kind of games, maybe a Bam game where he scores 32, then maybe Miami wins 2. And I'll say Lakers in 6. But if they don't, it definitely could be trending more toward Lakers in 5.
Kind of like the Magic in 09.
Yeah, they'll have a chance. Kind of like Denver. Denver had a chance to win a game, and they let it get away. And I still think the Lakers would have won in 6, but the Lakers found a way to win that game, and they wrapped it up in 5. To me, that's what this will come down to. The Lakers may control 3 of the games, and then a couple of games, maybe 3 of the games, will come down to the wire, and I think the Lakers will be able to pull it out with who they have on the roster. It's been a fantastic season, Elo. I know we're both excited about these NBA Finals. I was certainly almost expecting my team to be here. You're getting to enjoy the ride, and you got to enjoy it as much as you can and know that, Pat Riley's put this team in position to win now and down the road. So you have to be excited however it ends up.
Yeah, it should be fun.
He's Eric Lopez. I'm Mike Tuck. Thanks for watching. We're looking forward to watching the NBA Finals with the rest of you. Have a good night.